Hello everyone and welcome to the latest guide on Victoria 3 1.9, and today we're going to be going over your interest groups and political movements, the two main systems for your political aspirations, especially with your government. So, your interest groups are made up of 8 different types of groups. You've got your devout, your petite bourgeoisie, your industrialists, armed forces, landowners, intelligentsia, trade unions, and rural folk. They each represent different interests within your country and normally have their own aims that they go for. On a regular interest group, you can go to their ideologies in their overview by clicking on any of them, and you can basically see which ideologies they have. These are usually set in stone, and if it's ever going to change, the game will let you know when it is changing. But for the sake of this guide, this is usually what the bourgeoisie are supportive of. And these ideologies tell you which stances they have on which laws for each level. The more they endorse a law, the more they want that law enacted, and the more they oppose it, the more they don't want that law enacted. You also have ideologies from your leaders, and this is important to note because leaders effectively override the group's ideologies. So as a modernizer, for example, they want compulsory primary school, they want protectionism, they want proportional and graduated taxation. But normally, with mediocratic, the bourgeoisie don't support graduated taxation, they actually oppose it. However, because they have a modernizer right now, they actually would oppose switching to per capita taxation from proportional and wouldn't oppose going to graduated. And that matters an awful lot. So you've got to know what is the ideologies of each interest group, what is the ideology of its current leader. That's going to tell you what laws the interest group supports, what they oppose. And you can even go here under leader ideologies to see the chance of appearance, which is in fact caused by movements and other modifiers that we'll get into shortly. Each interest group also has 1 negative trait and 2 positive traits. The negative trait will occur if they're at -5 or worse approval for you. Basically, they're not happy with you, so they're going to cause problems. If the interest group is powerful, that's doubled. Same with any positive ones. This requires you to reach at least 5 approval, and then you're going to need to fall below 3 to actually lose it. Same thing goes with, say, xenophobia here, for example. We reached -5, we'd have to go below -3, or above -3 in this case with numbers, to turn it off. And then anything at the higher level requires you to reach level 10, which is where they're considered loyal. Right now, the bourgeoisie are considered just neutral because their lobbies are extremely upset. And these can have pretty big effects on your country. For example, 20% loan interest rate reduction is pretty nice. But if we head over to, say, the Orthodox Church, 5% increase to birth rate on everyone is not too bad if they're powerful and loyal. Speaking of the Orthodox Church, various countries like Russia, Qing, and other areas have special versions of different interest groups. This could mean that their traits are different or their ideologies are different. And for example, the Orthodox Church has the Russian Orthodox Patriarchy, meaning they actually support keeping serfdom in place, unlike most devout interest groups who don't care about land reform. So this can actually make initial reformers Russia harder if you're not sure on how to control their approval and get their support. We also have the corporatist ideology. This is actually an ideology that every devout interest group can get, but that requires you to research the corporatism ideology, which will then cause this change. There are several other technologies that can cause this too. Socialism will cause the trade union to get the socialist ideology. Researching feminism will cause anyone who has the liberal and egalitarian ideologies to become more supportive on the rights of women, meaning they're more likely to support women's suffrage over other laws. You also have things such as the armed forces, who are loyalists, etc., so on and so forth. So each interest group has their own things they support based on their ideology. That can be overridden by the leader. You can see the probability of which leader you'll get next time. It could be a historical character. It could be someone that's somewhat random with different modified weights. And each interest group is supported by different people. So as an example, the bourgeoisie tend to see shopkeepers and engineers support. They can get bureaucrats and mechanists. They can even go as far as to get laborers depending on the circumstances. For example, not being in non-agricultural employment makes them more likely to join the bourgeoisie. The devout tend to get more attraction if you have a state religion law, religious schools, if you've researched corporatism. They can lose it depending on literacy. You also have effects from pop loyalists and taxations on whether pops want to join certain interest groups. And to give you an example, we are going to go find some aristocrats. And aristocrats normally support the landowners because they're aristocrats. However, if they're working in urban administration, they have a significant weighted increase to support the intelligentsia. But let's say we go ahead and reform the government, kick the landowners out, and put the intelligentsia in government. If we go back to that same group of aristocrats, we are going to see the attraction hasn't changed yet because we haven't unpaused, but now there's an impact of taxation and pop loyalists that's now affecting the intelligentsia instead of the landowners. So say we were to drop taxes to normal, for example, and check it again. Now the support for the intelligentsia is going to move towards 35% of this pop group, up from 33%. And if we were to get more pop loyalists among the group, they would support the intelligentsia more because the intelligentsia are a part of the government. Which means pop loyalists can make it really easy to cement whoever's in power, and radicals can make it a lot more difficult because they don't want to support that current government. So let's go ahead and actually put the bourgeoisie in power instead this time to show it off further. In this case, the aristocrats don't care about the bourgeoisie, but the bureaucrats do. And we can see once again, pop loyalist is now causing them to have more attraction to the bourgeoisie. The intelligentsia, on the other hand, are like this. And to give you a different idea, did you know that farmers in slave states are more likely to support the landowners? It's true. Right now we have 215 from farmer profession for the southern planters in the US, 200 to the yeoman farmers who are the rural folk. But if we go to Illinois, where there is no slavery, and we check on the farmers there, well, now they only have a plus 50 to farmer profession for landowners and still have that 200 towards the rural folk. So there are various laws and effects that can change the interest group's support for each pop group as well. That is usually going to be which form of land reform you have, especially homesteading and commercialized agriculture, which it will tell you over here in the tooltips, which are very handy, and I would strongly encourage that you check these at any time. You also can see this in your bureaucratic tree. The intelligentsia will attract fewer aristocrats. If you go to elected bureaucrats, the bourgeoisie will attract more bureaucrats, so on and so forth. You can see this in your army law as well, depending on who the armed forces will end up attracting. So it does matter what laws you have as well, to a certain extent. We mentioned before, religious schools is causing more attraction to the devout. State religion is causing more attraction to the devout. Not every single law will have that effect, but a good chunk of your laws do affect the societal structure of your country. So your laws do matter when it comes to who's going to have power, not just from your form of power base, but just who has what rights, who can do what positions. And nominally, the devout are led heavily by the clergymen, but as you can see here, the clergymen have an absurd weight for the devout whenever it comes to them. But they can still get significant negatives too, such as this man not being so popular is actually hurting the attraction just a little bit. Enough to where a few of them are actually kind of supporting the intelligentsia since they're urban administrators. You can kind of go to each different pop group in each different building and kind of mouse over to check this further for more information. And I would strongly encourage you to do it further just to figure out why pops are being attracted to what group. Another example I should give actually is your trade union will actually have a negative pop attraction until egalitarianism and the labor movement are researched. So until these are done, the trade union will actually have a harder time appearing in your game. I think the last thing I want to go over is that the approval support does matter a lot. In this case, the bourgeoisie would be neutral, so they're only going to have a 0.5 times stall chance effect on passing racial segregation. So this is taking whatever their current clout level is and then modifying that by times 0.5. But if we go to multiculturalism, where the bourgeoisie will become angry, well, now that's a 1.5 times multiplier. It's making them extremely strong in opposing such a law change. So that is something to keep in mind, is that you can bribe your interest groups to make them more supportive of you in order to more easily pass laws that they otherwise wouldn't support if you're unable to change the leader of that interest group. And now we're going to move on to political movements, which are just as important as your interest groups. For example, we have the absolutist movement. This is a movement you're going to see at the start of the game in Russia. These have core movement ideologies. They have things they oppose, things they support, things they don't care about, as if they were an interest group. They can cause different ideologies to appear if they are pressuring an interest group. The more pressure they're applying, the more likely these ideologies can appear. There is also support and activism. Support basically gauges two things. How much can this movement pressure an interest group to align with its views, and how much support and opposition does it give for pass and stall chance on a law? Then there is activism. When below 25%, the passive threshold, movements don't have any support or pressure to whether you will pass or fail a law. However, once it's at least 25%, then they will start having that effect, both positive and negative. So there can be reasons to allow activism to get at or above 25% if you want help in passing certain laws. So maybe making a lot of the peasants radical during a peasant movement, for example, might help you do some land reform to get off serfdom to tenant farmers, which they will support. So that is one thing you could do with very high taxes at the start as Russia in order to kind of get that extra support. Certain movements like the labor movement, for example, will actually not appear until certain technologies are researched. As the name implies, the labor movement won't appear until the labor movement itself has been researched, funnily enough. That will usually allow the labor movement to appear almost immediately right after. They have their own things they support, they have their own ideologies they cause. And if we go to the trade unions, which they are pressuring, we can see there's a pretty good chance that the trade unions are either going to get a social democrat or a reformer. 3 different movements are exerting pressure, though. The modernization movement is also adding pressure, which is giving them a decent chance to end up getting a modernizer. And the nihilist movement is also adding pressure. So this is causing it to where one of their core leader ideology changes is going to be one of these 4. They could still get a protectionist in the end, but the weight is pretty low, and it's just due to other pressures. And a moderate is hilariously unlikely. So movements can be a way for you to help pressure your interest groups into getting certain leaders when all other rules are failing. Certain movements can also change depending on your laws. For example, the absolutist movement will always exist as long as you have monarchy and a non-voting distribution of power. However, if you were to change to something like landed voting, the absolutist movement is going to change into a royalist movement. The royalist movement only cares about maintaining the monarchy and will no longer have all these other laws they care about, such as trying to maintain traditionalism. Something else to note is that possible character ideologies, this is not the full exhaustive list. If we were to get a royalist movement early on, if we head over to Great Britain, who should still have one, we can see they only have the royalist ideology. However, if you research feminism, the royalist movement will change. It will be able to give you either regular royalists or enlightened royalists, who are more supportive of things such as multiculturalism. You also have things like the anarchist movement that will appear when anarchy is researched, the communist movement when communism is researched, or, well, rather socialism, but both the socialist and communist movements are tied to the same one. Vanguardism tends to appear from political agitation. A certain additional movement will appear once you research mass propaganda, helpfully shown by where exactly the party itself is listed. So a lot of your social texts kind of in this corner will allow additional movements to begin appearing. So that corner is very good for any additional movement spawns. You'll also have things like national movements that can appear if their people are being discriminated and there's enough support. You'll have usually a supremacist movement of your own interest group, usually a traditionalist movement for your primary religion, and then a variety of other ones that can either appear by random chance or can appear because of agitators. So a common example for an early Russia start might be to go ahead and go to your rule folk and kick out the first guy in charge, and then immediately invite him back as an agitator. If you do this, you'll note that a peasant movement will spawn right away. And this is also where you can bolster and suppress movements. Bolstering the movement is self-explanatory. It will increase their attraction over time to a certain point. And pressured, obviously, is the opposite way. You can pressure them, try to get people to no longer be in the movement. And if a movement falls below the 2% threshold, usually there's a decent chance it will end up disappearing. Some movements can come back, such as the royalist movement. It will always be around, as long as monarchy exists. But things such as the peasant movement and I believe the nihilist movement can actually be pressured out of existence, so long as all relevant supporting agitators have also been removed from your country. But one example here, though, is the modernization movement is getting up to 17% of the population. But if we were to change our mind and start suppressing it, well, now it's going to fall all the way to 4%. So you do have a decent amount of control over movements, and each movement has different variety of reasons for pops to support it. The modernization movement can be because of high urbanization, literacy, and various professions. But if you go to the labor movement, it is also dependent on whether one is below their expected standard of living. The absolutist movement depends on the ruler's popularity. The nihilist movement depends on how many radicals you have, among other professions. Polish national movement, well, are we being discriminated against? Is nationalism unlocked? Are we Polish? You have a lot of different possibilities for each movement, and I would strongly encourage you to go over to supporting pops and check each one to see why they're supporting it and for what reason. So highly urbanized states can feed various movements. High literacy can help things like the liberal movement, minority rights as well. But you've also got those effects like we showed where pop radicals can cause certain movements to get more pops over other ones. And I think the biggest thing for movements here, if we go to minority rights as an example, is their effects on success and stall chance. So if I wanted to pass racial segregation right now, I've already got a 30% chance without the movement, but with the movement, we're looking at closer to 39%, which makes it even easier to pass, since an increase in success chance also gives an increase in advance chance, and reduces the chance of debates, which can sometimes fail for you. A very high success chance can even smother stall chance to some extent. But the biggest thing to focus on here is how much do your interest groups like you, who's leading them, what do they support, what political movements you have, and how much authority you're willing to spend on supporting and suppressing them. Because even if they're at a 1% of marginal, it still matters. And if movements are brought down to that threshold of 2% or less support but still exist, they're generally unable to start civil wars, though angry interest groups supporting them could still allow them to start civil wars, which is very important to consider. I think the last thing I'd want to go over for this with your political system here, if I turn this back around, is that a lot of the support for various laws will change over time, partially due to text, but primarily due to changes with various ideologies. There is the matter of generals in your army as well, who can become leaders of your country, as well as executives. But for the executives and for your generals as well as admirals, this strongly depends on their popularity. If they're pretty unpopular, like they're in the negative, such as this man, usually they will never become the leader of an interest group because they're just not popular. No one really wants to support them. But say you take someone like this general here who's loved, he's at 55%, there's a decent chance he could become the leader of the Gentry Assembly in the future. There's not a guaranteed chance he would take it over compared to all these other chances, but it's why you're seeing a 37% chance for the leader characters here to form because of all the other chances that are kind of rolling in the background. Actually, you can see right here, this is that general with a 27% chance to be the next leader. And I did mention your executives can become leaders too, such as Anton here, who was actually on that chance screen as well for the Gentry. Or if we were to go to the armed forces, you've got a variety of different choices here, depending on who they're supporting. But this executive who is disliked, and is also a historical character for the Branobel Company, he's not going to become a leader anytime soon. His psychological affliction puts him below the positive popularity threshold, so he won't become leader unless extreme circumstances occur, which probably won't occur. With all that said, I think that kind of wraps it up for the political section. It basically just comes down to who leads the interest group, what is the interest group's ideologies, what are they currently supporting and opposing depending on the law that's currently enacted, which political movements do you have that are more relevant in your country, the character ideologies they cause, the interest groups they're pressuring, the various laws they support and oppose, how much support they have in your country, their relative activism, which, by the way, this can lead to civil war if it hits 100, and just etc. I would say experiment with the political movements, experiment with the interest groups, kind of run around with them a few games, fail a few times, learn how they work, and it will give you a lot more control over your political system in Victoria 3. If you have any other questions, feel free to ask them in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.